There's nothing quite like sitting down during a stormy night and playing a game that is so immersive and addictive that you can barely put the controller down. And of all the great games released this year, I think Demon's Souls arguably does this better than any other. Remakes often fight an uphill battle as they try to balance holding on to their original concepts, but making strides also to make the game better for modern audiences. Sometimes they take it too far, sometimes they just don't do enough. It's often a lose-lose situation. Having played the original Demon's Souls for upwards of 250 hours or so, I can confidently say the remake doesn't forget where it comes from, striking as honest a chord as anyone can hope for. It is incredibly faithful to the game, sometimes to a fault, by bringing back things that haven't aged so well, but overall carves out a beautiful remake that is tremendously enjoyable to play. Firstly, minor changes to item management and movements have made the moment-to-moment play just flat out better. In the original Demon's Souls, one of the things that made the combat more clunky than it really needed to be was that rolling wasn't omnidirectional, meaning you can only roll in 4 directions, left to right, back to front, vice versa. Now you can roll in twice the amount of directions. While I understand the few purists might gawk at this since it's a departure from the original mechanic, it gives players more precision, it's more comfortable to those who have played modern Souls games, and more importantly, it doesn't change the core experience at all, it just enhances it. One of the problems Demon's Souls initially had for those who didn't play it or remember it was that the frame rate was capped at 30 and that would often dip below that in demanding areas like the Shrine of Storms. So players didn't have as many frames to react to attacks or spells, and combined with a rigid rolling system, it made the game harder without giving players the tools to combat it. Many environments in Demon have incredibly narrow bridges and passageways which need to be traversed very carefully, and you'll often be forced to fight in these choke points. Those enemies have a fair bit of tracking, which means their swings will follow the player even though they may have rolled out of the way of the initial strike angle. Without the ability to roll in 8 directions, this meant that these areas were at times unnecessarily difficult only for the lack of technical refinements. Players already have enough trouble memorizing world routes, watching out for surprise attacks, and avoiding pitfalls. They don't need the game inhibiting them while they do so. With the remake, players not only have the ability to roll in more directions now, which gives them the precision they need to stay alive, but it removes many frustrations, such as accidentally falling to your death. Obviously, this means players can also now dodge projectiles easier and dive into safe spaces like cover and hallways a lot easier. Many boss encounters in Demon's Souls are designed in a way that forces players to interact with environments carefully. During the Man-Eater's fight, for example, a common way to die is to panic roll and fall off the bridge. Players only have a narrow walkway and a central platform to navigate and circumvent, thus having more control over rolling and movement is absolutely essential. It's no surprise that fighting the Man-Eaters today is less frustrating than it is in the original title, and this goes for many other enemies, such as avoiding the roll attack from silver skeletons in the Shrine of Storms, or staying safe in Latria from mind flayers. In a game that is so punishing upon death, that's an incredibly important benefit for such a small tweak to the game mechanic. Certainly, the increase to 60 frames per second also definitely helps in this regard, and makes the gameplay across the board more smooth, silky, and most importantly, manageable to stay in control. Secondly, Stockpile Thomas's new item burden system makes more sense for the game's balance and is just a huge help out while playing. Most people are familiar with the weight system implemented in Souls games, wherein if your equip load is too high, you'll fat roll or not be able to roll at all. Well, Demon's Souls not only had that, but another weight mechanic that accounted for your entire inventory, called item burden. If your burden was too high, aka you had too much shit in your inventory, you would be unable to pick up any more items. This would cause you to either leave it, drop other items and leave them behind to free up space to pick it up, or walk back to the Nexus to empty your load. This wasn't ideal, since you'd return to the same Archstone and all the enemies would be respawned and the items you left gone. This was fairly obnoxious and was removed in Dark Souls. It's to be assumed this was done because players cannot fast travel for the first half of the game back to Firelink Shrine, thus had much more of a necessity to carry all their stuff on them. The remake decides to keep the item burden system, but makes one small tweak to make it better. Players can now send items back to Thomas that would have otherwise overburdened them. When they return to the Nexus, they can retrieve the item from the storage box. This obviously means they can't use the item until they do so. This change is important for 2 reasons. One, it protects players from losing loot, since previously if they dropped something else to make room for an item and then ran back to the Nexus or died, those items would be lost forever. You can see how this would aggravate players, especially when those items were dropped by crystal lizards, which is not likely but definitely possible. More importantly too, the new system doesn't destroy the integrity of the game's difficulty in the process. Demon differs from other Souls games in that the worlds are distinct from other worlds. Each level has specific characteristics, enemies, and challenges, often better faced with certain gear and items, so it's important to have the right supplies on hand to tackle those unique situations. The item burden system was important to leave in the game because it prevents you from carrying everything you have into a world. Instead, you have to make a choice on what to bring in beforehand by making a little mini build, and that means dealing with trade-offs. For example, a player definitely wants to bring some sort of fire resist for Stonefang and poison for the Valley of the Poop. But you might also need some normal gear for the boss, and you definitely want to also have room to pick up gear. If you choose one thing, sometimes you can't bring the other. Having everything you need would trivialize these unique difficulty spikes, since players could just stop, pull out the perfect piece of gear on the fly and make those challenges easier or remove them entirely. Once that happens, the feeling of dread disappears, which is what the entire game is based on. With the remake, that key trait remains intact, while alleviating the hassle that once burdened it. Any change made to a game designed around despair should amplify that feeling, and the tweak to healing grass now carrying additional weights is exactly what the game also needed. In the original Demon's Souls, you could farm enough moongrass and healing items to bring in an essentially unlimited supply to any given world. This, again, completely eliminated the feeling of attrition that defines the game. Not only that, but it also created overly long PvP duels since everyone was carrying around a magical pouch of never-ending healing. The feeling of being stretched thin, forced into hard choices. Do I use my healing item now, or do I wait until I can get the full effect? This was kind of washed away. They could have limited the amount of healing items players could take in any particular world, but that would basically mimic the Estus system from Dark Souls. With the remake, healing now just takes up more space and it's harder to find, which makes it more difficult to take in excess. The less you have, the more uneasy the traveler, the more tense the game. Long treks into Latria's tower become stressful. Duels with Black Phantoms or invaders become more risky. If you're a Souls veteran, just think back to the first time you played this game. The awful feeling of running out of healing items when you really need them. This is what makes a good Souls game: scarcity, fear, and kind of feeling hopeless. And then overcoming those obstacles and feeling tremendous about it. So with the changes they actually made in the remake, you get the best of both worlds. Demon's Souls' bleak, oppressive atmosphere also received a huge overhaul, and having played the original many times, I think they did a terrific job with the PS5 version. Obviously, you're always going to lose something when bringing an old game into a new generation. That old lighting system, those textures, those sounds, those animations, flawed or stiff as they may be, they were still charming because that's how we remember them, and nostalgia is a powerful influence. But Demon's Souls is still its beautiful, dark, dreamy, mysterious, haunting self. All the areas were left more or less the same, but now they're amped up with terrific new lighting, atmospheric sound effects, and beautiful, piercing visual effects. Ripped flags dancing in the wind atop Latria's castle, it's a spellbinding view. The flags were in the original game, the bonfire too, the emerald sky sitting above the shadowy towers, but now it's just absolutely mind-blowing in terms of detail. The roaring crack of ivory lightning shakes the screen violently in the Shrine of Storms. It's the same place with the same geometry, but this little touch makes it so much more visually interesting. And that's really the point. Remakes have the potential to do things that the original game could not. Every little corner of Demon's Souls is filled with this kind of stuff. Not much was taken away, but a lot of fine detail was added in. You don't have to have played the original to appreciate the craftsmanship, but if you did, I think you'll appreciate it even more knowing that a lot of these details never existed in the first place. If they ever detract from the core vision, then they've gone too far. If they ever stylize the game too much, that it dishonors the mood, the feeling, or the atmosphere of the original game, then they should be flat out left out. Do they? Not really. I mean, outside the new Flame Lurker model, which I do feel is actually worse than the original, everything looks fantastic. The goal of a remake should always be to keep the essence of the original ideas intact, while modernizing the title to look, feel, sound, and play better. That way, those who love the legacy game can fall back in love with an old favorites, and new players can join in on the fun too. The new camera keeps the action in better framing than it ever used to, and features much less clipping with environments and terrain. World tendency has been left intact, which is a really cool system, but it's now easier to read and track how things are going with this new screen. Animation timers have been left the same, but the quality and smoothness of them have been improved and work brilliantly with the new vibration system on the PS5 controller. The underlying artistry has been kept whole, yet made even more visually appealing, and the dialogue, music, and game audio, including all diegetic sounds, have seen subtle enhancements to make the game feel more atmospheric and haunting. What you're left with is the same Demon's Souls we fell in love with, but much more playable and fun. Honestly, they were very conservative with the changes as not to dishonor the lineage of Souls, and in my opinion, they actually could have gone a little bit further and done things like fixing cheap tactics and exploits on certain bosses, and frankly, completely revamping the Dragon God encounter, which it's just dumb. But even still, it's a phenomenal remake, and if there was ever a standard to which these things should be held, it has to be Demon's Souls now. Demon's Souls was once the forgotten pioneer that changed the industry's viewpoints on the classic action-adventure game. Dark Souls would go on to take the spotlight from it, as it was a terrific game as well, but just reached more people. It became the household Souls name despite Demon spearheading the entire concept. It certainly built on the foundation in some great ways, and it was a terrific game by itself, most of all the amazing wrapping world design and the changes to the potion system that completely changed the dynamic of the game, but still, the foundation was always with Demon's Souls, and it is a beautiful thing to see the game brought back to life in 2020 so that everyone can see it firsthand. Demon's Souls for me reinforces the notion that time isn't always the determinant factor when looking at a game's overall quality, because if a small game made in 2008 can compete with games made 13 years later, then that is one hell of an achievement.